another interesting story emerging from India at this point in time, where it is now expected that the proposed $10 billion worth Zee-Sony merger may have hit a roadblock to a point that it may collapse. It may collapse. Those were the chances, the probabilities that we were discussing. Now, as of today, interesting data that is emerging from, and data, when I say data, I mean to say by the way of the $10 billion data deal.
Channels plus
exactly.
the 2 OTT platforms.
May not happen at all, come to think of it, because Sony is now sticking its neck out and suggesting some of the essential contentious clauses that it had proposed should be mitigated faster rather than later. Now, the deadline has passed for the merger, although both Zee and Sony entered the good faith clause, wherein which they could extend the deadlines if they wanted to, but that is not going to happen as well. Is the proposal coming through, Kartik? I think that's the question.
I don't know, Shweta, and I think this is again a Bloomberg report, and Bloomberg has been reporting on this matter, quoting sources. No official statement from Sony. In fact, when I spoke to my sources at Zee this morning before entering the studio, again there was absolutely no confirmation. In fact, a blatant rejection.
Haven't really heard from
In fact,
Sony.
A blatant rejection of this story coming in from the Zee quarters, saying that talks have been paused, and talks have been paused primarily because of the holiday season and nothing else. So, the Zee group has not received any notice from Sony of the possibility that Sony is unlikely to go ahead with the deal.
All right, Karan, Taurani joining us on the show at this point. Karan, thank you very much for taking time out. I think the biggest question that is staring at Zee at this point is, if the deal does not go through, what is in future for Zee Entertainment?
Hi, Preeti. Good morning. So I think if the deal doesn't go through, I think it's a big negative impact for Zee in terms of valuations. If you look at the price, it's moved up almost more than 50%, from the bottom of 170. And a lot of investors had built in that the merger will probably go through, and that will lead to further respite in terms of valuation multiple re-rating. So I think there is some sort of a risk, if that gets called off completely. But we don't foresee that happening. The probability of the merger getting called off is kind of low in our opinion, because we believe these are purely media reports, and whatever official statements that have come from Zee and Sony over the last 1 month have been on the positive side. Nonetheless, we cannot say completely, we cannot rule it off that the merger will 100% go through. There is a probability, and there's a high probability of the merger going through. But if at all some of the discussions don't fall in favor, there may be a 20% probability of things not falling in place as well.
So, Karan, I just want to understand from you, if Sony was made clear right at the at the stage when this merger was more likely to go through, you're saying it is still likely to go through, and even I agree with you. But I think it was very clear from the word go that Puneet Goenka would lead this merged entity, and the only blip there was the SEBI order, which again got quashed by the Securities Appellates Tribunal, stating that Puneet Goenka can in fact go ahead and occupy a management position. So it doesn't seem fair now for Sony to revisit that clause which it had agreed to, and that, according to the Bloomberg report, seems to be among the only contentions left between Sony and Zee to go ahead with the merger.
Yes, I think he has got a respite from SEBI Sat as such, in terms of he can go ahead of the CEO, become the CEO of the merged company because of the NCLT approval that the merged co would have got. But I think Sony being an MNC here, it would not be very comforting for them unless he gets a proper clean sheet, because apart from them mentioning or giving him respite that he can become the CEO of the merged co, they've also mentioned very clearly that the investigation will continue. So I don't think Sony would want to have a CEO who is undergoing investigation with SEBI. Now it's very clear that Puneet, in terms of potential demands, could have maybe asked for a higher non-compete because of SAT giving him respite, or he could have asked for a CEO position in the future, which means that once he gets a clean sheet, he should again come back as CEO of the company. Now, we don't foresee that Sony would give this kind of a commitment in writing, given the kind of company they are, the typical MNC culture that they have. So I think there's a reason here in terms of where the negotiations, could, take a standstill, and things could get a little bit of complications from here on, which is there. But as I say, the merger is equally important for both entities, because the external environment is very unfavorable right now. If RIL Disney, the deal goes through, you are going to see competitive intensity increasing. And I think Zee-Sony as a standalone entity, if the merger doesn't happen, will be at a big loss over here. And even for Sony, we believe that India is a very big focus market. So for them also to call this off is going to be quite tough.
Okay. Does it look like Sony is currently waiting and watching as to what impact this news could likely have on Zee? Because Zee's stocks were down about 10% this morning. And the adverse impact clause that could be evoked in case the market cap of Zee continues to reduce, it will be sweetening the deal for Sony. Do you think they could revisit the terms of the deal from here on?
I don't think revisiting of the terms is possible here from a share price perspective, because we've seen share price being volatile over the last 2 years. This is multiple media reports that have come out. I think we just need to await any kind of official statement, from Sony and Zee-Sony in terms of where the negotiations are. As per our assessment, I think whatever has come over the last 2 weeks from their end, because they have kind of agreed on some kind of an extension, we believe things could still stand at a positive bias, and it's too early to kind of come to a conclusion the deal will be called off.
So, Karan, you mentioned the deal between Reliance and Disney. Now, in the context of assuming that deal does go through hiccup-free, what happens individually to Zee Entertainment and to Sony's India business if this merger does not go through? Individually for Zee, who are the likely bidders? Individual for Sony, who are the likely bidders?
So I think in case RIL Disney go through and the deal gets called off, I think in terms of potential market share, both Zee and Sony will struggle here individually. If you look at the digital landscape, it's quite competitive there as well. Platforms are not able to kind of hike prices. They're not able to make big scale in terms of ad revenue. And with Jio Cinema offering content free, it's made life tougher for the platforms, to kind of grow their subscription revenue base as well. So the market is quite complicated at the digital side. At the linear TV side, things are quite challenging because growth rates have converged very sharply. We were hoping that, once the merger happens, Zee and Sony could come together, could drive synergies for the business, which could lead to lower content cost and maybe higher revenue synergies as well. So we're probably foreseeing, bargaining power shifting in favor of the platforms and moving away from the content creators, which has been the case over the last 2 years. So I think both companies will struggle a lot individually to grow, to scale. And, Jio Disney or rather Reliance Disney could gain a larger market share of the market than what they are at today put together.
All right, then would it be fair, Karan, to say that the calling off of deal doesn't make any sense for Sony as well as for Zee at this point? I think it's a win-win situation for both companies if the deal actually goes through.
Exactly. So I think, as I say, I think things will move on to the last mile, to the last day. And eventually, I think, sense should prevail between both the companies. And logically, I think both of them should move ahead with the deal.
All right, Karan, Taurani, thank you very much, sir. Thank you for taking time out and for joining us here on News9. Kartik, it doesn't really make sense. These news reports to me don't really make sense. And from what Karan is saying and suggesting that there is no real alternative either for Zee or for Sony, it's not like there is a bidder in waiting for Sony if this deal doesn't come through. So whoever is leaking these reports that a potential notice will come from Sony to Zee by the end of January, that's the timeline that they're suggesting, because the lawyers that you spoke to said, we haven't received any communication whatsoever for Sony. So for Zee to learn of these notices or learn of these developments from media reports, and for Sony to not come out in open and give some sort of clarity on what they're feeling, what they are going to do, doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make business sense for sure if it is a game of of power, and if it is a game of control and having a CEO who listens to one partner more than the other partner in this marriage, then it's a different story altogether. But it definitely doesn't make business sense for having invested 2 years and multiple millions of dollars for a $10 billion deal and 70 channels and really competing to become the largest among the largest, and all the regulatory hurdles and the race to become the largest entertainment operator in India. At this stage, apart from, just this little bit of power play, it doesn't make any sense for either party to walk out.
All right, power play is what it looks like at the moment. Remember, reports are now suggesting that Sony will officially send a notice to Zee to call off that merger by the end of January. These are all speculative in nature right now. There is no confirmation from either Zee or Sony.